My mother gave me a dusty envelope and told me to leave in 24 hours, but the truth I found changed her life and exposed all her secrets. I'm Angela and I'm 26. Yesterday morning, I watched my parents sign divorce papers after 28 years of marriage. And today, my mother just handed me an envelope that's about to change everything. But let me back up for a second. Yesterday's divorce came out of nowhere. No screaming fights, no obvious problems, just we need to talk. And suddenly, my parents were sitting across from each other at a lawyer's office like strangers. No explanation, no warning, just the sound of pens scratching on paper, and my entire world shifting underneath me. I thought today's coffee invitation was finally going to give me answers. You know, the mother-daughter heart-to-heart where mom explains what went wrong and assures me that sometimes these things just happen. Instead, I got something that makes their sudden divorce look like small talk. Mom had texted me at 7 this morning, meet me at Brewster's Cafe at 9. Important. The same coffee shop where we used to plan my birthday parties, where she helped me fill out college applications, where we'd gossip about Dad's questionable wardrobe choices. I figured it was the perfect place for her to finally explain why she'd just blown up our family. I arrived early, hoping to claim our usual corner table, the one with the wobbly leg that we'd learned to avoid over the years, next to the window where we could people watch while we talked. I ordered my usual vanilla latte and settled in to wait, mentally preparing myself for whatever explanation she was about to give. Mom walked in exactly at 9, which should have been my first red flag. She's never been punctual in her life. Usually runs at least 15 minutes late to everything, apologizing profusely while digging through her purse for whatever she's forgotten. But today, she moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the cafe like she was checking for something specific. Angela, honey, she said, sliding into the seat across from me without even ordering. We don't have much time. Much time for what? I wanted to ask, but before I could open my mouth, she was reaching into her purse with shaking hands. The woman who'd raised me to be punctual and prepared was clearly neither of those things right now. She pulled out an envelope, old and yellowed around the edges like it had been stored somewhere dark for years. The way she handled it carefully and deliberately made my stomach twist with anxiety. Listen to me very carefully, she whispered, leaning across our wobbly table. Don't open this here. Go straight home and pack a bag. You have 24 hours. I stared at her like she'd just started speaking in tongues. Mom, what are you talking about? 24 hours for what? She pressed the envelope into my hands, and I could feel how thick it was, stuffed with something substantial. Her eyes kept darting around the cafe, watching the other customers like any one of them might suddenly become a threat. I can't explain everything now. It's not safe, but Angela, your father. She paused, swallowing hard. And for the first time in my life, my composed, practical mother looked genuinely terrified. Your father isn't who you think he is. None of this is what you think it is. Okay, so apparently I was living in some kind of thriller movie now. You know, the kind where the protagonist thinks they're having a normal Tuesday until someone hands them a mysterious envelope and tells them their entire life is a lie. Except this wasn't Netflix. This was my actual mother acting like we were being hunted by secret agents. Mom, you're scaring me. What do you mean Dad isn't who I think he is? He's David Thompson, accountant from Ohio who collects model trains and falls asleep watching the Weather Channel every Sunday. She grabbed my wrist across the table, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who usually struggled to open pickle jars. Pack light, only essentials. Cash only for everything from now on. And Angela, her voice dropped to barely a whisper, trust no one else, not even family. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to discover. My mother, the woman who used to braid my hair and make chocolate chip pancakes on weekend mornings, was looking at me like she barely recognized me. I love you, sweetheart, she said, standing abruptly without having touched a drop of coffee. More than you'll ever know. But you need to go now. And then she was gone, walking out of that cafe like her life depended on speed, leaving me sitting there with an envelope full of mysteries and instructions that sounded like something from a spy novel. I sat there for several minutes just staring at this thing in my hands while the coffee shop continued its normal Tuesday morning routine around me. People ordering their usual drinks, checking emails, having perfectly ordinary conversations about perfectly ordinary lives. Meanwhile, I was apparently living in some alternate reality where mothers hand their daughters mysterious envelopes and tell them to disappear within 24 hours. Because that's totally normal suburban mom behavior, right? The smart thing would have been to open it right there in the cafe. But something about the genuine fear in her eyes, the way she'd looked around like we were being watched, made me think maybe she was right about not being safe. So, I paid for my untouched latte and headed home, my hands shaking almost as much as hers had been, carrying an envelope that was about to change everything I thought I knew about my life. I made it exactly to my childhood bedroom before ripping open that envelope. So much for following Mom's careful instructions about waiting until I got home safely, right? But honestly, would you have been able to resist? The contents spilled across my pink bedspread like pieces of someone else's life. First thing I saw was a passport, deep blue with United States of America printed in gold letters. I flipped it open and nearly dropped it on the floor. My photo stared back at me, but the name read Angelina Rodriguez, born in Miami, Florida. According to this document, I was apparently a 26-year-old Florida native who'd been issued this passport 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Mom had been planning whatever this was for 3 entire years. Next came a credit card, also in Angelina's name, and what looked like several thousand in cash. The bills were crisp and sequential, like they'd been sitting in a bank vault waiting for exactly this moment. There was a key attached to a plastic tag with an address in Clearwater, Florida, and a handwritten note that simply said, "Emergency apartment." Everything you need is there, but it was the letter at the bottom that made my blood run cold. Mom's familiar handwriting, but shakier than usual, like she'd written it under stress or in a hurry. "My dearest Angela," it began. "If you're reading this, it means the life we built for you is no longer safe. Your father is not the man you know. He's not even the man I thought I married 28 years ago. The truth is dangerous. And I've spent your entire life protecting you from it." I had to stop reading for a moment. You know that feeling when the ground shifts under your feet and suddenly everything you thought was solid turns out to be quicksand? Yeah, that was happening in real time. The letter continued, "Pack only what you absolutely need. Use the identity I've created for you. Go to the Florida address immediately. Do not contact anyone from your old life. Not friends, not coworkers, not family members. I will find you when it's safe. But until then, Angela Thompson no longer exists. You are Angelina Rodriguez now. Angelina Rodriguez." Even thinking the name felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Clothes that came with a completely different life story. And apparently a father who wasn't who I thought he was. There was more. I know this is confusing and terrifying. I know you have a million questions and I wish I could answer them all right now. But sweetheart, some answers are more dangerous than ignorance. Trust me. Trust the plan I've made for us. And trust that everything I've done has been to keep you alive. Keep me alive. What kind of suburban accountant father required this level of escape planning? This wasn't Dad's having a midlife crisis territory. This was Dad might be in witness protection or worse territory. I looked around my room taking in all the pieces of Angela Thompson's life. Photos from high school graduation. My college diploma hanging on the wall, the little snow globe from our family trip to Colorado last winter when our biggest concern was whether Dad would remember to pack his reading glasses. According to this letter, I was supposed to abandon all of it, become someone else entirely, start over with nothing but whatever fit in a suitcase and hope that someday maybe I could reclaim pieces of my old existence. The really unsettling part was how thorough Mom's planning had been. The passport was dated 3 years ago, which meant she'd been building Angelina Rodriguez's identity long before whatever crisis had finally triggered this emergency plan. What kind of marriage requires that level of contingency planning? What kind of husband makes his wife secretly prepare escape routes for their daughter? I started throwing clothes into a suitcase, my hands moving automatically while my brain tried to process the impossibility of the situation. Jeans, sweaters, underwear, the basics. It felt surreal, like packing for a vacation, except I might never come back. Should I take my photo albums, my grandmother's jewelry? How do you pack an entire life into a single bag? More importantly, how do you say goodbye to yourself? While I was deciding between my favorite sweater and practical thermal underwear, I became aware of an engine running outside. Not unusual for our neighborhood, except this engine had been running for the past 15 minutes without moving. I peeked through my bedroom curtains and felt my stomach drop. There was a dark sedan parked across the street. Windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. Engine running like whoever was inside was ready to leave quickly if necessary. The car hadn't been there when I got home from the cafe. It was positioned perfectly to watch our front door with a clear view of anyone coming or going. Suddenly, Mom's paranoid behavior at the coffee shop was making a lot more sense. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "They found you. Leave now." Back door. Great. Apparently, I now had mysterious allies sending me warnings about mysterious threats. This was officially the strangest day of my life. And considering my parents had just gotten divorced without explanation, that was really saying something. I grabbed my suitcase, the cash, the credit card, and the passport. Everything else, 26 years of Angela Thompson's life, would have to stay behind. As I headed for the back door, I took one last look around the house where I'd grown up. All those memories, all those ordinary moments that had seemed so normal just hours ago, now felt like props in some elaborate performance I hadn't known I was part of. Time to find out what the real story was. Turns out sneaking out of your childhood home with a suitcase and a fake identity is exactly as weird as it sounds. I went out the back door through Mom's garden, the same route I'd used exactly once in high school to meet Tommy Barnes at a party my parents had forbidden me to attend. Mom had caught me and grounded me for 2 weeks. If only teenage me had known that someday I'd be using the same escape route to disappear entirely from my own life. The dark sedan was still parked out front when I carefully made my way around the block to where I'd left my Honda. I kept my head down, trying to look like any normal person running Tuesday errands. Definitely not someone fleeing from mysterious watchers with a suitcase full of emergency supplies. As I drove toward the airport, following the GPS directions to what felt like my own disappearance, I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire existence had been some kind of elaborate performance. And I was just now finding out I'd been the only actor who didn't know it was all fake. The airport was busier than I'd expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Families heading home from vacations. Business travelers rushing between gates. Completely normal people living completely normal lives. I envied every single one of them. I found the first drugstore I could locate and bought the cheapest black hair dye they had along with scissors and oversized sunglasses. If I was going to become Angelina Rodriguez, I might as well look the part. The airplane bathroom became my transformation chamber. 30 minutes later, blonde Angela was gone forever. The mirror reflected a stranger with dark hair and sunglasses that covered half her face. "Hello, Angelina. Nice to meet you, I guess. You know what they don't tell you about dramatically changing your appearance in a public restroom? It's surprisingly easy when you're running on pure terror and adrenaline. Though I do not recommend cheap drugstore dye if you have any other options." My hair looked like I dunked it in chocolate syrup, but at least it was different. The flight to Tampa felt endless. Every person who walked down the aisle could have been coming for me. The businessman in 12C checking his phone, obviously reporting my location to whoever had been watching our house. The flight attendant who smiled at me, definitely suspicious. That crying baby in row 8, probably a distraction while someone planted a tracking device in my carry-on. Paranoia is exhausting, by the way. No wonder Mom had looked so tired lately. If she'd been living like this for years, constantly looking over her shoulder, it explained why she'd aged so much recently. I attributed it to marriage stress, but apparently the marriage falling apart was the least of our family's problems. I kept pulling out the key to the Florida apartment, running my thumb over the plastic tag. 1247 Sunset Drive, Unit 403, Clearwater, Florida. According to Mom's note, everything I needed would be there. But what did that mean exactly? Food, clothes, more fake identities, a detailed explanation of why my entire life had apparently been built on lies. The woman next to me was reading a romance novel with a shirtless guy on the cover, completely absorbed in whether the heroine would choose the Duke or the stable boy. I envied her fictional problems. Her biggest worry was literary love triangles. Meanwhile, I was wondering if my accountant father was secretly in the witness protection program. When we landed in Tampa, I followed signs to the rental car counter with my new credit card in Angelina's name. It worked perfectly, which was both reassuring and terrifying. How long had Mom been planning this identity? How much money had she managed to stash away under a fake name? The drive to Clearwater should have been relaxing. Palm trees, sunshine, the kind of postcard-perfect Florida scenery that usually makes people feel like they're on vacation. Instead, I spent the entire time checking my rearview mirror, convinced every car was following me. When I finally found 1247 Sunset Drive, I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring up at the building. It was a nice mid-rise apartment complex, the kind of place that would blend in perfectly anywhere in Florida. Smart choice for someone trying to disappear. Unit 403 was on the 4th floor, corner unit with windows facing the parking lot. I stood outside the door for a full minute before using the key, half expecting alarms to go off or security guards to appear. Instead, the lock turned smoothly and the door opened to reveal the most surreal sight of my already impossible day. The apartment was completely furnished. Not just furnished, but decorated like a high-end hotel suite. Leather couch, glass coffee table, abstract art on the walls, everything coordinated in calming blues and whites. But here's what really got me. Everything was chosen as if Mom knew my taste perfectly. The throw pillows matched the exact shade I'd painted my college dorm room. The books on the shelf were authors I actually read. Even the coffee in the kitchen was my preferred brand. She'd been planning this for years, building an entire alternate life for me down to the smallest details. The thought should have been comforting, knowing how much care she'd put into protecting me. Instead, it was absolutely terrifying. What kind of danger requires this level of preparation? I spent my first night in the apartment eating takeout Chinese food and trying to convince myself this was all some elaborate misunderstanding. Maybe Dad was having a midlife crisis. Maybe Mom was having a nervous breakdown. Maybe I'd wake up tomorrow and discover this was all some stress-induced nightmare. But when I woke up Wednesday morning, I was still Angelina Rodriguez, still hiding in a secret apartment in Florida, still waiting for someone to explain why my suburban life had imploded overnight. The apartment had everything I could possibly need. The kitchen was stocked with non-perishables. The bathroom had toiletries in all my preferred brands, and there were even clothes in the closet that were exactly my size. Mom had thought of everything, right down to the type of shampoo I used, which was somehow more unsettling than comforting. This level of detailed preparation suggested she'd been expecting this day for a very long time. I found another note on the kitchen counter tucked under a coffee mug that was exactly the style I would have chosen. You should be safe here for now. I've paid rent through the end of the year. There's more money in the bedroom safe. Combination is your birthday. Wait for me to contact you. Do not reach out to anyone from your old life. Love, Mom. The safe was hidden behind a painting in the bedroom. And when I opened it with my birthday combination, I nearly fainted. There was enough cash inside to live comfortably for months. We're talking grocery shopping every day and eating out constantly money. Where had she gotten all this? Dad's accounting practice must have been way more profitable than I'd realized, or there was something else going on entirely. And honestly, given the week I was having, I was leaning towards something else entirely. I spent Wednesday exploring my temporary new home, trying to piece together clues about what my life had actually been. The view from the living room showed the parking lot and street beyond, positioned strategically so I could see anyone approaching. The apartment had 2 exits, the front door, and a sliding door to a small balcony with fire escape access. Mom hadn't just planned for my safety, she'd planned for my escape routes, too. By Thursday morning, I was going stir crazy. You'd think being handed a luxury hideout would be relaxing. But when you can't leave, can't call anyone, and can't even order pizza delivery because you're supposed to be invisible, paradise gets claustrophobic fast. Plus, the silence was driving me insane. No work emails, no texts from friends asking if I wanted to grab lunch, no mindless scrolling through social media, just me, for walls, and way too much time to think about how my entire existence had apparently been an elaborate lie. I'd reorganized the kitchen cabinets twice, read 3 books, and watched more daytime television than any human should endure. If this was what witness protection felt like, no wonder people went crazy. That's when I heard voices in the hallway outside my door. 2 people talking quietly, their words muffled but their tone professional. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out what they were saying. Unit 403, one voice said clearly. You sure this is the right address? My blood turned to ice water. These weren't maintenance workers or neighbors having a casual conversation. They were looking for my specific apartment. They were looking for me. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, then remembered Mom's warning about trusting no one. What if these people had connections to local police? What if calling for help would just tell the wrong people exactly where I was? The voices moved away from my door, heading toward the elevator, probably to check with building management or review tenant information. Professional, methodical, like they were used to tracking people down. I quickly threw my essentials back into the suitcase. If they'd found me here, it meant my location was compromised somehow. Time to go. Even though I had absolutely no idea where to go next, the fire escape outside the balcony became my best friend. I climbed down 4 flights of metal stairs, praying my suitcase wouldn't make noise, banging against the railings. The parking lot was mostly empty in the late morning, just a few cars scattered around. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. East parking lot, blue Honda, keys under driver's seat. Go now. I looked around frantically and spotted a blue Honda Civic 3 spaces away from where I was hiding behind a delivery truck. Seriously, how many mysterious helpers did I have? Was this like some elaborate network where strangers were stationed all over Florida just waiting to help me escape? But what choice did I have? The voices I'd heard were probably inside the building now, maybe talking to the front desk, definitely trying to track down exactly which unit belonged to Angelina Rodriguez. I made a dash for the Honda, threw my suitcase in the back seat, and found the keys exactly where the text had promised. The car started immediately because apparently whoever was helping me had thought of everything. As I drove out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed again with directions to an address I didn't recognize. But at this point, following mysterious text messages seemed safer than trying to figure out my next move alone. At least someone in this insane situation seemed to know what they were doing, because I definitely didn't. The address led me to a small marina about 20 minutes outside Clearwater. I parked behind a seafood restaurant called the Pelican's Perch, exactly as the text had instructed, next to a dumpster that smelled like old fish and broken dreams. Not exactly the glamorous spy meeting location I'd been imagining, but then again, nothing about this week had matched my expectations. I sat in the borrowed Honda for 30 minutes, watching boats bob in the marina and wondering if my life would ever make sense again. Families were having lunch on the restaurant's deck. Kids pointing excitedly at pelicans hoping for scraps. Couples sharing seafood platters and probably normal conversations about normal things. Meanwhile, I was hiding behind a dumpster, waiting for mysterious instructions from unknown allies about threats I didn't understand. You know, typical Tuesday afternoon activities for suburban marketing coordinators. That's when I saw a familiar figure walking around the corner of the building. Not another mysterious stranger, but someone I actually recognized. Mom, looking exhausted and nervous, but definitely Mom. Angela, she said, rushing to the car with obvious relief. Thank God you got out safely. Mom, what the hell is happening? I demanded, getting out of the Honda. I've been hiding in Florida for 3 days. Strange people are tracking me down, and I'm apparently driving someone else's car now. I think I deserve some actual answers. She looked around the parking lot nervously before responding. You're right. You deserve to know everything. But not here. Follow me. She led me onto one of the docks where a small motorboat was tied up waiting for us. The marina was busier than I'd expected for a Thursday afternoon. Fishing boats were coming back from morning trips, their hulls slapping against the waves as they navigated toward their slips. Tourists were boarding sunset cruise boats even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. And families with kids were sharing late lunches at waterfront restaurants, pointing excitedly at pelicans, hoping for scraps. Normal people doing completely normal things while I was about to get on a boat to hear explanations about why my life had turned into some kind of spy thriller. The contrast was almost funny. 20 feet away, a dad was teaching his daughter how to tie boat knots. Meanwhile, I was about to find out if my accountant father was secretly a criminal. Get in. We need to go somewhere we can talk without being overheard. Mom, I am not getting on a boat with you until you start explaining things. This is getting absolutely insane. Angela, your father is not an accountant. The words hit me like I'd been slapped with cold seawater. What do you mean he's not an accountant? I've seen his office downtown. I've met Jerry from payroll and that secretary who always asks about my dating life. I've listened to him complain about tax season for my entire existence. That's all a cover story. Your father works for very dangerous people. And right now those people think he might be cooperating with federal authorities. They're looking for leverage to use against him. Leverage like me. Leverage like you. I stared at her, my brain refusing to process this information. My boring suburban dad, who collected model trains, fell asleep watching the Weather Channel, and got genuinely excited about new episodes of documentaries about World War II, was apparently involved with dangerous criminals. What kind of dangerous people are we talking about here? Like, tax evasion dangerous or break your legs dangerous? She sighed deeply, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. The kind who don't hesitate to hurt family members to send messages. The kind who consider loyalty more important than law. Great. So, we'd gone from tax evasion to might end up sleeping with the fishes. This was definitely not how I'd imagined my week going when I'd woken up Monday morning worried about whether I'd remembered to pay my electric bill. We got in the boat and she started the engine with practiced ease, heading toward a small island about a mile offshore. I had to grip the sides as we bounced across the waves, my newly black hair whipping around my face like some kind of dramatic movie scene. Since when do you know how to drive a boat? I shouted over the engine noise. Since I've been planning for this possibility for 3 years, she shouted back. 3 years. She'd been preparing for my life to explode for 3 entire years. While I'd been blissfully unaware, worrying about normal things like whether I should switch to a high-deductible health insurance plan. When we reached the island, she tied up at a small wooden dock like she'd done it 100 times before. The place was basically a tiny patch of sand with some palm trees and a picnic table, the kind of spot that probably existed specifically for people who needed to have conversations they couldn't have anywhere else. Your father's real name is David Torino, she began once we were settled at the picnic table. His family has been involved with organized crime for 3 generations. When I met him in college, he was trying to get out, trying to build a legitimate life away from all of that. Torino, our entire name is fake. We changed everything when we got married. Started fresh, moved across the country, created completely new identities, or so we thought. But you don't just leave that world behind, Angela. There are always connections, always obligations, always people who remember where you came from. I thought about all those phone calls Dad took in the garage. The way he'd changed subjects when I asked about work, those sudden business trips that seemed to happen at odd times. So, he's been lying to me my entire life. He's been protecting you your entire life. We both have. The less you knew, the safer you were. Until now. Until now. Something went wrong recently. Someone in his family suspected he might be cooperating with federal authorities and they started watching all of us. That's why I had to get you out. The pieces were starting to fit together. The divorce wasn't real. The divorce was legal protection. Creating distance between you and your father on paper, making it harder for anyone to justify targeting you. I looked out at the water, watching boats in the distance, living their normal lives. So, what happens now? Do I just stay hidden forever? Your father is working on a solution. But until then, you need to stay invisible, and you need to be prepared for the possibility that Angela Thompson can never come back. The weight of that statement settled over me like a blanket. Everything I'd ever been, everyone I'd ever known, might have to stay buried forever. Mom, yes, honey. Next time you guys decide to blow up my entire existence, maybe give me a little more warning. She laughed, and for the first time in days, it sounded genuine. I'll add that to my notes for next time. Because apparently in our family there was always a possibility of a next time. We spent 2 hours on that little island while Mom filled in the gaps of my apparently fictional childhood. Turns out those business trips Dad took were actually meetings with federal investigators. The expensive home renovations weren't from a successful accounting practice. They were funded by money he'd been secretly moving out of his family's operations. He's been cooperating with the FBI for 3 years, Mom explained, watching boats pass in the distance, providing information about financial transactions, helping them build cases against other family members. 3 years, the same time you started building my fake identity, the same time we realized how dangerous this was going to get. Your father knew that eventually someone would figure out what he was doing. We had to be ready. I tried to imagine my boring suburban dad secretly recording conversations and copying financial documents for federal agents. It was like discovering Clark Kent really was Superman, except instead of saving the world, he was betraying organized criminals. What made him decide to cooperate? Mom was quiet for a moment, watching a pelican dive for fish near our dock. You did. When you graduated from college, when you started your career, when you began building your own life, he realized he didn't want that world to ever touch you. The only way to protect you was to help destroy it. So, my normal Tuesday morning life had been destroyed to protect me from threats I'd never known existed. There was some irony in that, but I was too emotionally exhausted to appreciate it. How much longer do I have to stay hidden? A few more days, maybe a week. The federal agents are finalizing arrangements to move your father into witness protection. Once that's complete, once the immediate danger is over, you can decide what you want to do. What do you mean what I want to do? You can try to reclaim Angela Thompson's life. Go back to Portland, pick up where you left off, or you can stay Angelina Rodriguez, start completely fresh somewhere new. The choice will be yours. The choice. As if choosing between my real life and my fake life was just another Tuesday decision, like picking what to have for lunch. We headed back to shore as the sun started setting, painting the water in shades of orange and pink that should have been peaceful. Instead, I felt like I was watching my old life disappear with the daylight. Where will you go? I asked as we tied up the boat. I'll stay close, but not too close. Keep an eye on you until this is all over. I've got another apartment rented about an hour north of here. Under another fake name? Under another fake name? Your mother has become quite good at disappearing when necessary. She drove me back to the marina parking lot where I'd left the Honda. Before I got out of her rental car, she handed me another phone. This one's clean, untraceable. If you need anything, if anyone finds you, if you just need to talk, use this number. She pointed to a contact labeled simply M. What about Dad? When will I see him again? When it's safe? When this is all over? When he's not a danger to you anymore? I hugged her in that parking lot behind a seafood restaurant, breathing in her familiar perfume and trying to memorize the feeling of being someone's daughter instead of just someone hiding from unknown threats. I love you, sweetheart. This will all be over soon. I love you, too, Mom. Try not to disappear completely, okay? She laughed sadly. I'll do my best. I drove back to Clearwater in the borrowed Honda, checking my rearview mirror out of habit now. The apartment I'd fled that morning was compromised, so I needed to find somewhere new to spend the night. My phone buzzed with a text from the mysterious helper number. Extended Stay America on Gulf Boulevard, room 237, key at front desk under Rodriguez. Apparently, my invisible support network had thought of everything, including backup accommodations. I was starting to feel like I was living inside some elaborate witness protection program designed specifically for suburban daughters of wannabe informants. Room 237 was basic but clean with a kitchenette and a view of the hotel parking lot. I sat on the bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, trying to process everything I'd learned while the Florida evening settled in around me. My father was a criminal turned informant. My mother was apparently a master of creating false identities and escape plans. My entire life had been a carefully constructed lie designed to keep me safe from threats I'd never imagined existed. And somehow, despite all of this insanity, I was starting to understand my parents for the first time in my life. The dad who'd always seemed distant, who took mysterious phone calls and changed subjects when I asked about work, had actually been protecting me from a world where family members could be hurt to send messages. The mom, who'd always seemed overly cautious, who worried about things that seemed unlikely to happen, had been preparing for the day when our carefully constructed normal life would fall apart. For 26 years, they'd been living double lives. For 26 years, they'd been actors in their own home, playing the roles of boring suburban parents while secretly navigating federal investigations and organized crime politics. I thought about all the times I'd been frustrated with them for being so ordinary, so predictable, so careful about everything. Turns out, ordinary and predictable had been the point. They'd been hiding in plain sight, building a fortress of suburbia around me while they dealt with threats I'd never known existed. My phone rang, interrupting my existential crisis. The caller ID said unknown, which had become the theme of my week. "Angela, it's Agent Martinez with the FBI." Great. Now I had federal agents calling me. "How did you get this number?" "Your parents provided it." "I need to let you know that the situation has accelerated. We're making arrests tomorrow morning, which means you and your family need to be in protective custody tonight." "Protective custody where?" "There's a federal facility about 2 hours north of where you are. Can you be ready to leave in 30 minutes? I looked around the hotel room that had been my temporary refuge. Do I have a choice? Not really. This is for your safety and the safety of your parents. What about after the arrests? What happens to us then? We'll discuss that once the immediate threat is neutralized. For now, pack whatever you have and wait in the hotel lobby. Agent Rodriguez will pick you up." Agent Rodriguez. Even the federal agents were named Rodriguez. Now, at this point, I was starting to think the entire state of Florida was populated exclusively by people with my fake last name. I threw my few belongings into the suitcase that had become my constant companion, and headed down to the lobby. 20 minutes later, a woman in a dark suit appeared, flashed credentials, and led me to a black SUV that looked exactly like every federal vehicle in every movie I'd ever seen. "Angela Rodriguez?" she asked. "Angelina," I corrected automatically. "And yes, that's me. Or at least that's who I'm supposed to be now. I'm Agent Rodriguez." "No relation, I assume." "No relation to anyone, as far as I can tell. My entire life is apparently fictional." She smiled as we drove north on Interstate 75. It gets easier. Learning to live with a new identity. I mean, the first few weeks are the hardest. You sound like you speak from experience. Most of us in the witness protection program do. I stared out the window at the dark Florida landscape rushing past. In a few hours, my father's former associates would be arrested, and whatever remained of my old life would be officially over. Angela Thompson would become a missing person. And Angelina Rodriguez would have to decide what came next. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in federal protective custody, waiting to learn whether I could ever go home or if I'd have to start completely over somewhere new. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I wasn't sure which option scared me more. You know what's funny about having your entire existence revealed as an elaborate fiction? After the initial shock wears off, you start wondering which parts of yourself were real all along. I guess I was about to find out. I woke up Thursday morning to someone knocking on my hotel room door. For a second, I forgot where I was, forgot who I was supposed to be, forgot that my life had become some kind of witness protection situation. Then, reality crashed back, and I grabbed the untraceable phone Mom had given me, ready to call for help if whoever was knocking turned out to be one of the mysterious, dangerous people I was supposedly hiding from. "Angela, it's us," Dad's voice. Through a hotel room door in Florida when he was supposed to be back in Oregon dealing with federal investigators and organized crime family members. I opened the door to find both my parents standing in the hallway looking like they had been traveling for hours. Dad had dark circles under his eyes, and Mom looked like she'd aged 5 years since yesterday. "What are you doing here?" "I thought you said it wasn't safe for us to be together." "Plans changed," Dad said, glancing nervously down the hallway. "We need to leave Florida. All of us today." "Great. So much for my temporary stability and extended stay hotels and mysterious support networks. Leave Florida and go where?" "Somewhere safe," Mom said, which wasn't exactly the detailed explanation I was hoping for. Pack your things. We'll explain everything once we're on the road. On the road to where? I demanded. I'm getting pretty tired of following mysterious instructions without knowing what's actually happening. Dad looked at me directly for the first time since this whole nightmare started. Angela, I know this is confusing and frightening. I know you have every right to be angry with me, but right now I need you to trust me one more time. The man standing in my hotel room doorway didn't look like the boring accountant who'd raised me. He looked tired, worried, and older, but also somehow more real than he'd ever seemed before, like he'd finally stopped pretending to be someone else. The federal investigation moved faster than expected, he continued. They're making arrests today, which means anyone connected to my family needs to be somewhere else immediately. Arrests of who? People who would very much like to have a conversation with me about what I've been telling federal agents for the past 3 years. I grabbed my suitcase and followed them out to the parking lot where Mom's rental car was loaded with what looked like all of their belongings. How long have you been planning this? I asked as we drove north on Interstate 75. Since the day you were born, Dad said quietly from the passenger seat. I knew eventually I'd have to choose between my family and my father's family. I just hoped it would take longer to reach that point. Your father's family being the organized crime family. My father's family being the people who don't appreciate federal cooperation. We drove for hours, stopping only for gas and drive-through food, heading toward what Mom cryptically described as somewhere we can regroup. I spent most of the trip staring out the window at the Florida countryside, trying to process the fact that my parents had been living double lives for my entire existence. Where are we going? I asked again as we crossed into Georgia. A place your mother found, Dad said. Somewhere we can stay while the federal agents finish their work. How long will that take? However long it takes, Mom said from the driver's seat. Days, weeks, maybe months. We don't know yet. I leaned back in the seat, watching Georgia pine trees blur past the window. So, we're just going to hide indefinitely while federal agents arrest your former crime family associates. We're going to stay safe while I finish cooperating with an investigation that should have happened years ago, Dad corrected. And after that, we figure out what comes next. What comes next? Like we were talking about changing jobs or moving to a new city, not completely abandoning our identities and starting over from scratch. We stopped for the night at a small motel outside Valdosta, Georgia. 2 adjoining rooms paid for with cash, registered under names I'd never heard before. Apparently, Mom had a whole collection of fake identities just waiting to be used. That evening, sitting in a motel room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and old carpet, Dad finally told me the whole truth. My real name is David Torino. My father was Vincent Torino, and his business was import-export with very flexible ethics. When I turned 18, I was supposed to take over part of the family operations, but you didn't want to. I wanted a different life. I met your mother in college, fell in love, thought I could just walk away from everything I'd grown up with. But you couldn't. You don't just quit organized crime, Angela. There are expectations, obligations, family loyalty that goes back generations. When you're born into it, leaving means betraying everyone you've ever known. I was starting to understand why he'd been taking those secretive phone calls all these years. So, you stayed involved, but tried to keep us separate from it. I found a middle ground. I became the family's financial manager, handling investments and legitimate business fronts. Less violent, more removed from daily illegal activities, but still essential enough that they couldn't just let me disappear. For 26 years, it worked. I kept their books, managed their money, helped them maintain legitimate appearances. In exchange, they left me alone to live my suburban life with my wife and daughter. What changed? His expression darkened. Generational conflicts. The younger family members think the old ways are too cautious, too careful. They want bigger risks, higher profits, and they don't trust anyone who seems too comfortable with normal life, like you, like me. And my position gave me access to financial information that could destroy the entire organization if it fell into the right hands. So you gave it to the FBI. So I gave it to the FBI. We sat in silence for a while listening to trucks pass on the interstate outside our motel window. What happens now? I asked eventually. Now we wait for word that the arrests are complete and the immediate danger is over. Then we decide what kind of life we want to build next. As who? Angela Thompson is supposed to be missing. Angelina Rodriguez is a fake identity. Who am I supposed to be? Dad smiled sadly. Whoever you want to be, sweetheart. For the first time in your life, you get to choose. The motel in Valdosta became our temporary headquarters for the next week while we waited for news from the federal agents. Every morning, Dad would check his secure phone for updates on the investigation. Every evening, we'd eat takeout food and watch the news, hoping not to see our faces on any wanted posters. It was the strangest family vacation I'd ever experienced. And by vacation, I mean hiding from organized crime consequences while my father's former associates got arrested. On day 3, Dad got the call he'd been waiting for. "It's done," he said, hanging up the phone. 12 arrests across 3 states. The leadership structure is completely dismantled. So we're safe now, I asked. Safe from immediate physical threats? Yes, but there's still the matter of what happens next. What happened next was a meeting with FBI agent Patricia Martinez in a conference room at the federal building in Atlanta. She looked exactly like what you'd expect from a federal agent. Professional, serious, and very good at explaining complicated situations in simple terms. "Mr. Torino," she began, "your cooperation has been invaluable in dismantling one of the most significant organized crime operations in the Southeast. The information you provided led to successful prosecutions and will likely prevent future criminal activities. What does that mean for my family?" Dad asked. "It means you're no longer in immediate danger, but it also means you can never go back to your previous lives. Too many people know about your cooperation now. David Thompson, suburban accountant from Oregon, needs to disappear permanently." "And Angela?" Mom asked. Agent Martinez looked at me directly. "Angela can choose. She was never involved in any criminal activities, never had any knowledge of the family business. She can reclaim her original identity and return to her previous life. Or she can start fresh with a new identity in a new location. Choose." There was that word again. Like deciding whether to keep my entire life history or throw it away was just another multiple-choice question. What would starting fresh involve? I asked. New name, new social security number, new background history. We'd help you establish residency in a new city. Find employment. Create all the documentation needed for a completely fresh start. And if I choose to go back to being Angela Thompson, you'd need to explain your disappearance to friends, family, employers. Create a plausible story for where you've been for the past 2 weeks. Resume your previous life with the understanding that you can never discuss what really happened. I thought about my apartment in Portland, my job in marketing, my friends who probably thought I'd vanished without explanation. My entire social media presence was probably filled with concerned messages and speculation about where I'd gone. How long do I have to decide? Take as much time as you need, Agent Martinez said. But understand that once you make the choice, it's permanent. If you choose to start fresh, Angela Thompson disappears forever. If you choose to go back, you can never contact your parents again for their safety and yours. Never contact my parents again. After spending 2 weeks discovering that everything I'd known about them was wrong, I'd finally started understanding who they really were. And now I might have to choose between keeping them and keeping myself. Where will you go? I asked them after the meeting. Somewhere warm, Mom said with a sad smile. Somewhere we can finally stop pretending to be people we're not. With new names and new identities. With new names and new identities. We drove back to the motel in silence. Each of us probably thinking about the impossible choice I was facing. In the parking lot, Dad turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Angela, I need you to know something. Everything I did, every choice I made, every lie I told was to protect you. I know that doesn't make it right, but I need you to understand that you were always the most important thing in my life, more important than your criminal family, more important than anything. That's why I spent 3 years secretly building a case against them. That's why I was willing to destroy everything I'd known since childhood. Because you deserved a chance to live a life free from their influence." I looked at my parents, these 2 people who'd apparently spent 26 years constructing an elaborate fiction to keep me safe from threats I'd never known existed. I need time to think, I said. Take all the time you need, Mom said. Whatever you decide, we'll understand. That night, lying in a motel bed in Georgia, I stared at the ceiling trying to figure out who I was supposed to be. Angela Thompson, marketing coordinator from Portland, living the life everyone expected me to live. Or Angelina Rodriguez, starting completely fresh with no history, no connections, no predetermined path. For the first time in my life, I had complete freedom to choose my own identity. And it was absolutely terrifying. I spent 3 days walking around Atlanta thinking about who I wanted to be. 3 days of sitting in coffee shops, wandering through parks, watching normal people live their normal lives while I tried to decide whether to reclaim my old existence or build a completely new one. It's funny how you can live somewhere your entire life and never really notice the details until you're facing the possibility of never seeing it again. I found myself memorizing things about Atlanta that I'd never paid attention to before. The way the afternoon light hit the buildings downtown. The sound of street musicians in the park. The smell of food trucks serving lunch to office workers who probably had no idea how lucky they were to have normal problems. On Tuesday, I sat in a Starbucks near Georgia Tech watching college students stress about finals and part-time jobs and whether their crushes would text them back. I envied their predictable problems. Their biggest worry was probably whether they'd pass organic chemistry or figure out what to do after graduation. Meanwhile, I was sitting there with 2 different identities to choose from, trying to decide which version of myself I wanted to be for the rest of my life. Angela Thompson, marketing coordinator from Portland, Oregon, daughter of suburban parents, living a life that everyone expected her to live. She had friends who were probably worried sick about where she disappeared to. She had an apartment full of furniture and photo albums and all the accumulation of 26 years of existing in one place. She had a job that was boring but steady. Relationships that were comfortable if not passionate. A whole social media presence documenting her ordinary but predictable life. Or Angelina Rodriguez, a blank slate, free to become whoever she wanted to be with no history weighing her down, but also no connections to anchor her. She could move anywhere, try anything, reinvent herself completely without having to explain to anyone why she was changing. The choice should have been obvious. Who wouldn't want complete freedom to start over? But here's what I realized. On Wednesday morning, sitting in Piedmont Park, watching people walk their dogs and push strollers and live their beautifully mundane lives, Angela Thompson had never really been free to choose anything. Her entire existence had been carefully constructed by parents who were protecting her from threats she didn't know existed. Her job, her apartment, her carefully curated social circle, even her personality had been shaped by limitations she'd never understood. How do you mourn the loss of an identity that was never really yours to begin with? On Thursday morning, I called Agent Martinez. I've made my decision, I told her. And I want to be Angelina Rodriguez. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but also somehow right. Angela Thompson had been someone else's creation, built around limitations and protections I'd never understood. Angelina Rodriguez could be whoever I decided to become. Are you sure? Agent Martinez asked. Once we process the paperwork, there's no going back. Angela Thompson will be declared missing, presumed dead eventually. Your friends, your coworkers, anyone who knew you will have to accept that you're gone forever. I thought about my college roommate who still sent me birthday cards. My work friends who grabbed drinks after particularly stressful days. My neighbor who always asked me to water her plants when she went out of town. They'd never know what happened to me. They'd probably spend months wondering if I'd been kidnapped or killed or just decided to disappear on my own. I'm sure, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. What I didn't tell her was that the decision had been easy once I realized the truth. I'd never really been Angela Thompson anyway. That identity had been just as fictional as Angelina Rodriguez, just with a longer history and more elaborate backstory. My parents had spent my entire life creating a character for me to play, keeping me safe by keeping me ignorant. The careful suburban daughter, the responsible marketing coordinator, the woman who dated appropriate men and lived within careful boundaries. That had all been as much of a performance as any fake identity the federal government could create. Now I could finally write my own story. The federal agents set me up with everything I needed to start fresh. New social security number, new driver's license, new credit history, even new educational transcripts that showed Angelina Rodriguez had graduated from the University of Miami with a degree in marketing. Where would you like to relocate? Agent Martinez asked during our final meeting. Somewhere I can disappear completely, I said. Somewhere Angela Thompson never existed. She suggested several cities. But when she mentioned Austin, Texas, something clicked. Big enough to get lost in. Small enough to feel manageable. Far enough from Oregon that I'd never accidentally run into anyone from my old life. Austin it is. I said the hardest part was saying goodbye to my parents. We met at a small restaurant near the Atlanta airport. The three of us finally together as our real selves for the first and last time. I'm proud of you, Dad said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. It takes courage to start over completely. I learned from the best, I replied. You two have been starting over your entire lives. Mom was crying, trying to hide it behind her menu. I always hoped you'd get to live a normal life. I never wanted this for you. This isn't something that happened to me. I told her, this is something I'm choosing. For the first time in my life, I get to decide who I want to be. We hugged in the restaurant parking lot, knowing it might be the last time we ever saw each other, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something completely new. If you ever need anything, Dad said, if you're ever in trouble, there's a way to contact us safely. Agent Martinez has the details. I know. And Angela, Mom said, then caught herself. Angelina, remember that everything we did was because we love you. I know that, too. I flew to Austin that afternoon with a single suitcase and a bank account funded by the federal government's Witness Protection Program. Not exactly how I'd imagined starting my adult life. But then again, nothing about my adult life had gone according to plan. The apartment they'd arranged for me was in South Austin, a one-bedroom with hardwood floors and windows that faced east toward downtown. It was completely empty, waiting for me to fill it with furniture, decorations, memories, and whatever kind of life Angelina Rodriguez decided to build. I stood in that empty apartment on my first evening in Texas, watching the sunset over a city where no one knew my name or my history, where I could become anyone I wanted to be. For 26 years, I'd been someone else's daughter, someone else's creation, someone else's carefully constructed protection plan. I'd lived in a world of secrets and lies designed to keep me safe from threats I'd never understood. Now I was free. Free from the past, free from expectations, free from the weight of a history that had never really been mine anyway. It was terrifying and exhilarating and lonely all at the same time. But it was mine. My first week in Austin, I did absolutely nothing productive. I bought a mattress, some basic furniture from IKEA, and spent way too much money on takeout food while I figured out how to be Angelina Rodriguez. You'd think becoming someone new would be complicated, but it's actually surprisingly simple. Get a driver's license, open a bank account, find an apartment, start building a credit history. The federal agents had given me all the documentation I needed to prove that Angelina Rodriguez was a real person with a real past. The hard part wasn't the paperwork. The hard part was deciding what kind of person Angelina should be. Angela Thompson had been cautious, responsible, always trying to please other people. She'd stayed in Oregon because that's what was expected. Worked in marketing because it seemed practical. Dated safe guys who fit her suburban lifestyle. Angelina Rodriguez could be anyone. I started small. I dyed my hair auburn instead of black. Bought clothes in colors I'd never worn before. Signed up for a yoga class where I'd never have to explain why I was new in town. The yoga instructor was a woman named Sarah who talked about authenticity and finding your true self. I almost laughed during the first class, thinking about how I was probably the least authentic person in the room. But then I realized that maybe authenticity wasn't about having a consistent past. Maybe it was about making choices that felt true to who you wanted to become. After 2 weeks of exploring Austin and trying to figure out who Angelina Rodriguez should be, I started job hunting. Marketing seemed like the safe choice, the practical choice, the choice Angela Thompson would have made. Instead, I applied for a position at a small nonprofit that helped refugees resettle in Texas. It wasn't related to my degree. It didn't pay particularly well, and I had absolutely no experience in social services, But something about helping people start over in a new place with nothing but hope and determination appealed to me. I understood what it felt like to rebuild your entire life from scratch. "Why do you want to work with refugees?" the interviewing manager asked. "Because I know what it's like to start over in a completely new place with nothing but a suitcase and fake documents," I said, then quickly added, "metaphorically speaking." She laughed. "That's the most honest answer I've heard in weeks." "When can you start?" The Austin Refugee Services Center became my introduction to building a life that was actually mine. My coworkers were idealistic, passionate people who genuinely cared about helping others. My clients were families who'd left everything behind to build new lives in America, just like I'd left everything behind to build a new life in Texas. I was good at the work. Really good. Turns out when you've recently navigated the complex process of creating a new identity and starting over in an unfamiliar place, you're pretty qualified to help other people do the same thing. "You seem to really understand what our clients are going through," my supervisor mentioned after I'd been there a month. "I've moved around a lot," I said, which was technically true. "Well, whatever your background is, you have a gift for this work." 3 months into my new life, I realized I was happier than I'd ever been as Angela Thompson. Not because my circumstances were better, but because I was finally making choices that felt like mine. I rented a small house in East Austin with a backyard where I could grow vegetables. I adopted a dog from the local shelter, a mixed breed named Bruno, who'd been abandoned by his previous owners. I started learning Spanish so I could communicate better with clients who were still learning English. I made friends with my neighbors, joined a book club, started dating a teacher named Marcus, who made me laugh, and never asked too many questions about my past. 6 months after arriving in Austin, I was walking Bruno through the neighborhood when my phone rang. Unknown number, which always made me nervous. "Angelina." The voice was familiar but cautious. "Mom." "Hi, sweetheart. How are you doing?" I looked around at my new neighborhood, at the house I'd chosen, at the dog who'd decided I was worth trusting. At the life I'd built from nothing. "I'm good," I said, and realized I meant it completely. "I'm really, really good. I'm glad your father and I were doing well, too. Different names, different city, but we're together and we're safe. That's all I wanted to know." "Angela," she said, then caught herself. "Angelina, I need you to know that we're proud of you. Proud of the choice you made. Proud of the person you're becoming." "Thanks, Mom. That means everything." After we hung up, I sat on my front porch with Bruno, watching my neighbors come home from work, thinking about how strange life can be. A year ago, I'd been someone else entirely, living someone else's carefully constructed version of a safe life. Now, I was exactly who I'd chosen to become. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. A year into my life as Angelina Rodriguez, I did something Angela Thompson never would have done. I signed up for a weekend rock climbing class. Not because I particularly wanted to climb rocks, but because the old me had always found excuses to avoid trying new things. The old me was careful, practical, always choosing the safe option. The new me was tired of being safe. "You sure you want to try this?" Marcus asked as we drove to the climbing gym. "You realize this involves heights and trusting your life to a rope, right?" "That's exactly why I want to try it," I said. Which was the kind of answer that would have confused Angela Thompson, but made perfect sense to Angelina Rodriguez. The climbing instructor was a woman named Rita who'd been scaling mountains since before I was born. She talked about finding strength you didn't know you had, about trusting yourself in situations that seemed impossible. "The fear never goes away," she said as we practiced basic techniques. "You just learn to climb anyway." I thought about that while I was hanging 20 feet off the ground, looking down at the safety mat and wondering what the hell I was doing. A year ago, I would have been paralyzed by the height and the uncertainty. Now, I just kept climbing. At the top of the wall, I looked down at Marcus cheering me on, at the other students attempting their own climbs, at a life I'd built by making choices that scared me. And I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of heights, not of uncertainty, not of the future. The work at the refugee center continued to challenge and fulfill me in ways my old marketing job never had. I'd been promoted to program coordinator, which meant I was now responsible for designing services for new refugee families. You've really found your calling, my supervisor said during my annual review. Have you considered going back to school for social work? Actually, yes, I said, surprising myself. I've been thinking about getting a master's degree. Angela Thompson had gotten her bachelor's degree because it was expected, choosing a major that seemed practical rather than passionate. Angelina Rodriguez could study whatever she wanted. I applied to the University of Texas for their Master of Social Work program focusing on refugee and immigration services. Not because it was safe or practical, but because it felt right. When the acceptance letter arrived, I called the untraceable phone number Agent Martinez had given me for emergencies. Is everything okay? Mom answered immediately, probably assuming I only called when something was wrong. Everything's perfect, I said. I got into graduate school. Graduate school for what? Social work. I want to specialize in helping refugees and immigrants. There was silence on the other end, then the sound of her crying. Mom, are you okay? I'm proud of you, she said. So incredibly proud. You're building exactly the kind of life I always hoped you'd have. A life where I help people who've had to start over completely. A life where you choose who you want to be instead of letting circumstances choose for you. Marcus and I had been dating for 8 months when he brought up the subject of our future together. We were sitting on my back porch watching Bruno chase butterflies in the garden I'd planted. I love you, he said simply. And I want to build a life with you. I love you, too, I replied, realizing it was true. But there are things about my past that I can't talk about. Things that would change how I feel about you. I thought about organized crime families and federal investigations and parents living under assumed names. Probably not, but things that I literally cannot discuss. Everyone has a past, Angelina. I'm not dating your history. I'm dating who you are now. And who am I now? You're someone who works with refugees because you understand what it means to start over. You're someone who tries rock climbing because you're not afraid to challenge yourself. You're someone who adopted a dog that no one else wanted because you believe everyone deserves a second chance. He wasn't wrong. Angelina Rodriguez was someone who believed in second chances, who understood that sometimes the best way to honor your past is to build a completely different future. What are you asking me? I said. I'm asking if you want to move in together, start building something permanent. Permanent. After a year of intentionally avoiding anything that felt too settled, too established, the idea was both appealing and terrifying. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. That night, I walked Bruno through the neighborhood I'd learned to call home, thinking about permanence and second chances, and the difference between running away from something and running towards something. For 26 years, my parents had been running away from their past, creating elaborate fiction to distance themselves from who they'd been. For the past year, I'd been running toward a future, creating a new identity based on who I wanted to become. Maybe it was time to stop running entirely. When I got home, Marcus was still sitting on the back porch reading a book in the lamplight. I've thought about it, I said. And yes, let's build something permanent. He smiled and kissed me. And for the first time since this whole adventure started, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because someone else had planned it for me, but because I'd chosen it myself. 2 years after becoming Angelina Rodriguez, I graduated with my Master of Social Work degree. Mom and Dad couldn't attend the ceremony, obviously, but they sent a card to my office at the refugee center with a simple message. Proud of the woman you've chosen to become. Marcus was there cheering loudly when they called my name, probably embarrassing my classmates, but making me feel like the most accomplished person in the world. Bruno was waiting at home with a new toy shaped like a graduation cap because apparently even my dog was proud of me. I'd been offered a position as Director of Family Services at the Austin Refugee Center, which meant I'd be designing and implementing programs for newly arrived families. It was exactly the kind of work I discovered I was passionate about, helping people navigate the complicated process of starting over in a completely new place. How does it feel to be officially qualified to do what you've been doing naturally for 2 years? My supervisor asked after the graduation ceremony. Like I finally found the job I was supposed to have all along, I said. That evening, Marcus and I had dinner at our favorite restaurant to celebrate. We'd been living together for over a year now, and he'd never once pressed me for details about my past that I couldn't share. He knew I'd grown up somewhere else, that I wasn't close to my family, that I'd come to Austin to start fresh after some kind of difficult situation. He didn't know about organized crime or federal investigations or parents living under assumed names. He didn't need to know. Angelina Rodriguez's story was the only one that mattered. "I have something for you," he said over dessert, pulling out a small wrapped box. For a second, I panicked. If this was an engagement ring, I'd have to figure out how to explain why I couldn't provide certain documents for a marriage license. Why my family wouldn't be able to attend a wedding. Why so much of my history seemed to be missing. Instead, it was a necklace with a small pendant shaped like a compass. "For always knowing which direction you want to go," he said. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it completely. That night, lying in bed in the house we'd made together, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From Angela Thompson, suburban daughter living someone else's carefully constructed life, to Angelina Rodriguez choosing every aspect of her existence. I thought about my parents somewhere in the country living under different names, finally free to be honest with each other after decades of maintaining elaborate cover stories. I hoped they were happy. I hoped they'd found a way to build something real together. I thought about the families I worked with, people who'd left everything behind to build new lives in America. They understood something most people never learn. That identity isn't about where you come from. It's about who you choose to become. Some of them would spend years missing their old countries, their old languages, their old selves. Others would embrace their new identities completely, grateful for the chance to start over. I'd chosen to be grateful. 3 years after arriving in Austin with nothing but a suitcase and a fake identity, I owned a house, had a career I loved, a man who loved me, a dog who thought I was the best person in the world, and friends who knew me as Angelina Rodriguez, director of family services, rock climbing enthusiast, and champion of second chances. Angela Thompson had been someone else's creation, carefully constructed to keep me safe from dangers I'd never understood. Angelina Rodriguez was my own creation, built from choices that felt true to who I wanted to be. Some people might say I'd lost my identity when my parents' past finally caught up with them. I preferred to think I'd finally found it. The truth is, we're all constantly becoming new versions of ourselves anyway. Every choice we make, every experience we have, every relationship we build changes us in small ways. Most people just don't get the chance to do it all at once, to consciously decide who they want to be and start fresh. I'd been given that chance, and I'd used it to build a life that was entirely mine. Marcus rolled over in his sleep, putting his arm around me, and Bruno jumped up on the bed, even though he wasn't supposed to, settling down at our feet like he owned the place. This was my family now, not the one I'd been born into, not the one that had spent my entire childhood protecting me from their secrets, but the one I'd chosen to build. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely authentically myself. Not Angela Thompson, not even really Angelina Rodriguez, but someone new, entirely new. Someone who understood that love sometimes means letting go, that safety sometimes requires courage, and that the best way to honor your past is to build a future worth having. Outside, Austin was settling into another peaceful night. Inside, I was exactly where I belonged.